The lie was already on the table before anyone spoke. Too quiet, too careful. That's how you know somebody's bleeding and trying not to drip. I didn't need the newspaper that morning. I didn't need the headlines, the riots, the shouting outside Harlem. None of that mattered inside my kitchen. The danger was sitting 3 feet away from me, hiding behind a spoon. Margaret wouldn't look up. 16 years old, sharp mind, clean spirit. Raised under my roof, not the streets. That was the deal I made with God and the devil both. She stayed clean. I handled the dirt, but her shoulders were wrong, curled in, guarded, like a fighter protecting a rib that's already cracked. I watched her stir oatmeal she wasn't eating. Watched the way her wrist trembled when she lifted the spoon. Watched the lie build itself before she ever opened her mouth. "Morning," I said. She jumped, just a little, enough. "I'm fine, Granddaddy." People think liars avoid eye contact. That's amateur stuff. Real fear lives in the body, in the flinch, in the breath that comes too fast. I let the silence do the talking. Silence always tells the truth if you give it time. She rushed the explanation. Gym class, a fall, nothing serious. That's when I looked at my wife. Mame didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her eyes were already wet, already angry, already afraid of what I might do next. Margaret grabbed her bag too fast. Kissed my cheek like she was late for a train she couldn't miss. Out the door before anyone could stop her. I touched the spot where her lips had been. It felt cold. That feeling came back, the old one. The same feeling I used to get when a corner was wrong or a car stayed parked too long. Instinct. Survival, the kind you don't argue with. "Mame," I said, still watching the door. "Check her room." She had already checked. Uniform sleeve ripped clean off. Ink soaked deep into the fabric, permanent, angry, written by someone who wanted the message to last. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. That's not how real decisions are made. "Gym class," I said, soft, final. Mame tried to stop me without saying stop. She talked about schools, about fitting in, about how girls like Margaret don't get second chances in places built for other people's children. She was right. Which is why I couldn't let it go. My granddaughter thought rules would protect her. Thought if she stayed smart and quiet, the world would leave her alone. That's not how power works. I didn't go charging anywhere. That's what fools do. First you listen. Then you learn. Then you move. I made one call, just one. By nightfall I had names, bloodlines, fathers with titles, boys who had never been told no in their lives. A golden child sitting on a throne his family built with money and silence. And suddenly the picture got clear. This wasn't teasing. This wasn't kids being kids. This was a message, and messages only stop when the sender understands who's reading them. I stood in the dark hallway outside Margaret's room long after she fell asleep, listened to her breathe, counted every rise and fall like it was currency. I promised myself something right there in that quiet. Whoever touched her didn't just cross a line. They walked into a war they didn't know existed. And tomorrow they were going to learn who really ran the board. I didn't dress like a man going to war. That's the first mistake people make. War isn't loud at the beginning, it's polite, it smiles, it asks permission. I skipped the loud suits. No colors, no flash. Midnight blue, clean lines, conservative cut. The kind of suit that makes people assume you belong wherever you're standing. The kind that makes doors open before questions form. I didn't ask Margaret if she wanted a ride. I already knew the answer. Fear makes people want control over small things, like bus schedules, like pretending everything's normal. I waited until she left. Then I called for the car, not the flashy one. The black Cadillac, long, heavy, quiet, the kind of car that doesn't rush and doesn't explain itself. Red was driving now, young, solid, didn't talk unless spoken to. I liked that. "School," I said. He didn't ask which one. The city changed as we moved. Harlem faded behind us. Brick turned into trees, sirens turned into birds. Lawns got wider, smiles got tighter. Places like that don't welcome men like me. They tolerate us if we behave, if we remember our place. I never forgot my place. I just refused to stay there. The school sat up on the hill like it was judging everyone who approached it. Iron gates, white columns, money baked into the bricks. Red stopped right at the front, blocking traffic, blocking assumptions. I stepped out slow. Let the moment stretch. The guard clocked me immediately. Hand drifted toward his baton before his brain caught up. Old habits die hard when fear's involved. "I'm here to see the principal," I said. No attitude, no threat, just certainty. He hesitated. Eyes flicked from my face to the Cadillac, back to my face again. He knew authority when he saw it, even without a badge. Inside, the halls went quiet as I walked through. Kids stopped talking. Shoes stopped moving. A ripple of silence followed me like I owned the place. I didn't look at them. I wasn't there for an audience. I went straight to the office and kept walking. That's another thing people misunderstand. If you hesitate, they stop you. If you move like you belong, they scramble to catch up. The principal started talking before I even sat down. Apologies. Procedures, policies. I let him finish. Then I told him what I found in my granddaughter's bag. Bruises, slurs, fear. His face drained fast. Another man spoke up. One of those community types, gray suit, soft hands, loud opinions. I turned my head just enough to shut him down. "I didn't ask you," I said. The room understood the rules after that. I named the boy, didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. That's when the principal realized this wasn't a complaint. It was a countdown. I gave him 2 options. Both ended the same way. The difference was how messy it got. 10 minutes later, the door opened. 3 boys walked in like they'd never lost anything in their lives. Jackets, smirks, confidence borrowed from fathers who fought with pens instead of fists. The leader sat in the middle, tall, handsome, rotten from the inside out. He didn't look at me at first. That told me everything. Then he smiled, and that smile told me something else. He thought he was untouchable. That's the most dangerous place a man can stand, because once you believe that, you stop seeing the trap. And I was already standing inside it with him. He finally looked at me, not with fear, not yet, with boredom. That's how boys like him survive as long as they do. They mistake privilege for armor. They think the room bends because they exist in it. He spoke past me, asked the principal what this was about, like I was furniture. I let him talk. I let him lean back. Let him spread himself across the seat like the future owed him space. His friends laughed at nothing, eyes darting, trying to read the temperature and failing. I stepped closer, not into his face, not aggressive, just close enough to make him aware of distance for the first time in his life. "Leadership," I said quietly, "that's what they call you." He nodded, proud. That nod would cost him. "Leadership is responsibility," I continued. "Means when something happens under your watch, it's yours, good or bad." He smirked, said something slick about tradition, about protecting what's his. That's when I knew the words in Margaret's notebook didn't come from ignorance. They came from permission. I leaned in, voice low enough that only he could hear. "You ever notice," I said, "how bullies only work in packs?" His smile twitched. I didn't grab him right away. I let the thought land, let it echo, let his body catch up with his brain. Then I took him by the collar and lifted him like he weighed nothing. The room froze. No punches, no rage, just control. That's scarier than violence. I pinned him to the wall, not hard enough to break him, hard enough to rearrange his understanding of the world. "Your father's name don't mean a thing in here," I whispered, "and it means less outside these walls." He tried to speak. Nothing came out. I told him about rules, real ones, the kind written in consequences instead of books, the kind men disappear over. I told him who Margaret was to me. That's when his eyes changed. Not fear yet, recognition. Like a man realizing he's been playing the wrong game. I let him go. He slid down the wall, breathing like he just learned what air was for. I turned back to the principal, smoothed my jacket, adjusted my cuffs. "This gets fixed," I said, quietly, permanently. He nodded too fast. I walked out without looking back. Didn't need to. I could feel the balance shift behind me. Power doesn't announce itself when it moves. It just leaves people standing in the wrong place. Outside, the sun was out like nothing happened. Red opened the door. I got in. "Everything straight?" he asked. "For now," I said. The car pulled away. I didn't see the police cruiser fall in behind us right away. Didn't hear a siren. Didn't need to. When I noticed it, I smiled to myself. Because when the law starts following you without lights, it means someone important got scared. And scared men don't play fair. Not when judges have friends, not when reputations are at stake, and not when they think they still have the upper hand. The lights didn't scream, they whispered, just a soft flicker of red and blue against the back window. No siren, no urgency, that's how you know it's personal. Easy, I told Red. Hands steady, let him feel comfortable. The car rolled to the curb like it had nothing to hide. That's another rule. Guilt smells loud. Confidence stays quiet. 2 troopers stepped out, not city boys. These had stiff backs and empty eyes, the kind who don't live where they police. The kind who enjoy reminding you of that. One tapped the glass too hard, testing, measuring. Out of the car, he told Red. Not asked, told. He stays put, I said from the back seat. Calm, polite, final. The second one leaned in close, flashlight aimed straight at my face even though the sun was still up. Power move, old trick. Got a report, he said. Disturbance up in Riverdale, vehicle matches. Disturbance, I repeated. That's a flexible word. He didn't smile. Judge's boy got scared, he said. Judge didn't like that. There it was, names change everything. Names turn traffic stops into messages. They walked to the back of the Cadillac. I heard the baton before I saw the damage. Glass cracked. Metal sang. They came back smiling, handed me a ticket like a gift. Broken tail light, he said. Happens. I looked at the paper like it offended me. Tell your judge, I said softly. Cheap damage is easy to fix. What costs money is when people start asking why. The smile slid off his face just a little. They drove off fast, too fast. Red was shaking. Anger does that to young men, makes them want to solve problems with speed. Not yet, I said. This ain't the fight. Back in Harlem, the squeeze started. Health inspectors with clean shoes and dirty intentions. Fire marshals finding smoke where there wasn't any. Raids that came without warning. Books seized. Men bruised. Money bleeding out in small legal cuts. That's how judges fight. They don't swing, they suffocate. My phone didn't stop ringing. Everybody talking. Everybody scared. Everybody looking at me like I was supposed to blink. I didn't. I sat in the back room and listened. That's where answers hide. This ain't about your girl anymore, Tiny said. Low voice, nervous eyes. He's trying to break you. I nodded. Good, I said. Means he's desperate. Desperate men rush, they overplay, they leave fingerprints where they shouldn't. Dig, I told Tiny. Not his speeches, not his friends. I want the thing he prays nobody sees. Tiny hesitated. If we find it. Then we don't shout, I said. We wait. Because real power doesn't kick the door in. It knocks once politely, and when it's answered, everything changes. The answer came at 3 a.m. That's when secrets feel safest. When decent people are asleep and liars think the dark is on their side. Tiny didn't knock. He never knocked when the news was bad or expensive. He just came in, rain on his coat, breath uneven, holding an envelope like it weighed more than it should. I sat up on the cot, hand already on the pistol. Old habits don't retire. It's him, Tiny said. You were right. I took the envelope, didn't rush. Rushing is how men miss details. Inside wasn't money, it was paper, ledgers, names that didn't belong in public places, numbers that didn't belong next to a man who wore a robe and talked about virtue. The judge didn't drink, didn't chase women, didn't do anything loud enough to be forgiven. He gambled, bad, private games across state lines, Italian money. The kind that doesn't send reminders, the kind that sends men. He wasn't winning. He was drowning. I did the math in my head before Tiny finished talking. That's another thing about desperation, it makes patterns. That's why he's leaning on us, Tiny said. He needs cash, fast. He's robbing you to pay them. I laughed, couldn't help it. The irony was too clean. A man who preached law stealing from criminals to cover his own sickness. A judge hiding behind a badge while begging gangsters for mercy. Where? I asked. New Jersey, Tiny said. Same crew every time. They're tired of him. That part mattered most. Tired creditors sell cheap. By sunrise, I was on the road again. Different suit, different face. Same calm. I didn't threaten anyone, didn't need to. I paid, bought the debt, bought the paper, bought the problem. When I left Jersey, I had something better than leverage. I had ownership. Sunday came like it always does for men who think God is watching everyone but them. The judge sat in his country club, shaking hands, smiling for wives and donors, teaching his son how power is supposed to look. He didn't see me until I was already at his table. That's when his world tilted. I slid the paper across the linen like it was a menu. He didn't have to read long. His face told me everything. "What do you want?" He whispered. "Peace," I said, "and memory." I didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten his family, didn't touch him. I didn't have to. Because when a man realizes his secrets have a new owner, fear does the rest. He agreed to everything. The raids stopped. The pressure vanished. The school became safe again. Before I stood up, I left him one last condition. $1 every week. Not for the money, for the reminder. When I walked out, nobody clapped. Nobody stopped me. Respect doesn't need noise. But as I stepped into the daylight, I felt it again. That old feeling. Because men like that don't forget humiliation. They wait. And somewhere between pride and revenge, someone always decides to make a move they can't take back. The city went quiet after that. Too quiet. My phone stopped ringing. Inspectors vanished like they'd never existed. Police cars found better places to be. Business started breathing again, slow and careful, like a man fresh out of the water. Every Friday an envelope showed up. Handwritten address. Careful penmanship. $1 inside. Sometimes a note that said nothing. Sometimes just the check. I never cashed them. I framed the first one and hung it where I could see it every day. Not as a trophy, as a clock. A reminder that time was moving, even when things felt settled. Margaret came home lighter, steps easier, books clean, no flinching when doors closed, no rush to explain bruises that weren't there. She thought the world corrected itself. I let her believe that. That's what protection really is, letting someone sleep while you stay awake. Graduation came and went. She walked that stage like she belonged there because she did. I watched from the front row, hands folded, face still. No smiles, no tears. Just pride sitting heavy in my chest. The judge wouldn't meet my eyes that day. His son did, not with hate, not even fear anymore, with understanding. That look said he finally knew the truth about power, not the kind you inherit, the kind you survive. Afterward, we drove home through Harlem. Windows down, laughter in the back seat, life pretending to be normal. At a red light, I noticed a car across the intersection. Engine idling, driver watching too long, not police, something else. The light changed. They didn't move right away. I felt that instinct again. The one that never lies. Some debts don't end when they're paid. Some men don't accept ownership. Some wars just change uniforms. I leaned back. Let the light turn green again before we rolled. Because whoever was watching thought the game was over, and I knew better. The board was still set. The pieces were still breathing, and somewhere someone was deciding whether to make the next move. I was already waiting. I didn't tell anyone about the car. Not Red, not Mame. Definitely not Margaret. Some things you keep to yourself. Same way you keep a knife in your sleeve and a thought behind your eyes. That car showed up again 3 nights later. Different block. Same patience. Engine running just enough to stay alive. Whoever it was, they weren't lost. They were waiting. That's the mistake people make when they think the war is over. They confuse silence with surrender. I adjusted my routine, changed routes, left lights on in rooms I wasn't using. Let the house look awake when it was. Old tricks still work. Tiny came by after midnight, didn't sit down. "You're being tested," he said. "Not cops, not mob." "Then who?" He hesitated. That told me plenty. "Men who don't like owing favors," he said. "Men who think judges shouldn't bow to Harlem." I nodded, pride again. Always pride. It outlives common sense. Margaret was asleep upstairs, dreaming about college applications and futures that didn't involve looking over her shoulder. That mattered more than any territory I ever held. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. Empty, quiet, too clean. I smiled. Let them watch, let them wonder. Because the difference between them and me was simple. They were waiting for a mistake. I was waiting for confirmation. And when it came, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be public, but somebody somewhere was about to learn the hardest lesson in this city. That once you put your eyes on my family, you don't get to look away. Confirmation came dressed like coincidence. A city truck stalled too long at the corner. A man pretending to read a paper upside down. A phone call that rang once and went dead. That's how surveillance looks when amateurs think they're professionals. I didn't rush it. Rushing is how you scare prey into bolting. I let the days pass. Let Margaret laugh. Let Mame believe the storm had finally moved on. Meanwhile, I counted faces. The man by the bodega showed up 3 times in 1 week. Different coat, same walk, same shoes. He watched the house like he was memorizing it. I had read Follow Him one night. Not close. Just close enough to learn habits. He didn't go to a bar, didn't go home. He went downtown, Federal Building, side entrance. That told me everything. This wasn't revenge. This was ambition. Somebody wanted a headline. Somebody wanted to be the man who finally put a crown on my name and a pair of cuffs on my wrists. Judges hate being owned. Cops hate being reminded they answer to someone else. And men like that don't forget, they recruit. I stood in the kitchen that night, lights off, looking at Margaret's graduation photo on the wall, thought about how every clean future costs something ugly. I had already paid. The question now was who was willing to pay next. Because when the law stops pretending and starts hunting, they don't come for business. They come for blood. I reached for the phone, not to warn anyone. Not to hide anything. To make a move. And somewhere in the city at that exact moment, someone else picked up a phone too. Thinking they were about to end a story, not knowing they were stepping into the last chapter. I didn't call my captains, didn't call lawyers, didn't call favors. When the law sharpens its knife, you don't block it. You guide where it falls. I made one call to a man who didn't owe me, didn't like me, and didn't scare easy. A man who made a living knowing which way the wind was about to turn. He listened, didn't interrupt. Then he said, "They're building something." "I know." "Big," he added, "quiet, federal quiet." That word changes the temperature in any room. "They won't touch your businesses first," he said. "Too messy. They'll reach for leverage." I looked up the stairs toward Margaret's room. Light off, safe for now. "They won't get it," I said. He paused. "You sure?" I was, because I had already moved the pieces they thought they were coming for. Accounts shifted. Names replaced. Paths rerouted so clean it looked like it had always been that way. What they'd find would be noise. What they wanted was pressure. I walked the block that night. No coat, hands visible, let them see me see them. The man by the bodega stiffened when our eyes met. He looked away too late. Fear always betrays itself. I leaned close as I passed him, didn't stop walking. "You tell whoever sent you," I said calmly, "that if they want to talk, they should knock. Sneaking around makes people nervous." I kept moving. Behind me, I felt it, that shift. That moment when someone realizes the hunt isn't going the way they planned. Back home, I locked the door and stood in the dark a long time. They thought they were closing in, thought the net was tightening. They didn't understand something fundamental. You can't trap a man who already decided what he's willing to lose. And if they kept pushing, if they crossed the wrong line, City wouldn't hear about it in court. They'd feel it in the silence that followed. I turned off the light and waited. The knock came 3 nights later. Not loud, not scared, measured. That told me who it was before I reached the door. I didn't reach for a gun. Guns turn conversations into endings. I wanted answers. 2 men stood there, suits too clean for Harlem, shoes that had never touched these sidewalks. One smiled like he practiced. The other didn't bother. "Mr. Johnson," the quiet one said. "Mind if we come in?" I stepped aside. Hospitality confuses people who came prepared for resistance. They sat. I stayed standing. That balance matters. They talked about cooperation, about noise, about how certain situations didn't need to become complicated if everyone stayed reasonable. I let them finish. Then I poured myself a drink, slow. "You're late," I said. The smiling one blinked. "Excuse me." "You've been watching my house for weeks," I replied. "If you wanted to talk, you could have knocked sooner." Silence settled heavy. The quiet one leaned forward. "You've embarrassed powerful people." I nodded. They embarrassed themselves. He didn't like that. They hinted at indictments, at witnesses, at how daughters sometimes feel pressure without meaning to. That was the line. I set the glass down carefully. "You touch my family," I said, voice low, steady, "and I stop having conversations." The smiling one stopped smiling. I didn't threaten them, didn't raise my voice. I just let them see the certainty. They stood to leave, business unfinished. That worried them more than anger ever could. At the door, the quiet one paused. "This doesn't end here," he said. "Nothing ever does," I replied. After they left, I locked the door and leaned against it for a moment, felt the weight of the years, the choices, the cost. Upstairs, Margaret turned in her sleep. Safe, unaware, that was still the goal. Outside, the city kept breathing. Somewhere, files were being organized, phones ringing, decisions forming. They thought they were closing in, but they just learned something important. I wasn't running, and men who don't run force the world to decide how far it's really willing to go. The next move didn't come fast. That's how I knew it mattered. When men rush, they're angry. When they stall, they're weighing costs, counting favors, asking themselves who bleeds first if this goes wrong. I let Harlem see me. Same barber shop, same cafe, same slow walks past corners where everybody pretends not to look. If they were building a case, I wasn't going to help them by hiding. Margaret got her college letters that week. She read them at the kitchen table, hands shaking, smile trying to stay professional like she'd been taught. Bright future, clean path, no shadows attached. Mame cried. I didn't. I just watched Margaret explain her plans like the world had always been fair to her. And for a moment, because of the work done in the dark, it had been. That's when the phone rang. One call, no introduction. "They're going to move," the voice said. "Soon." "Where?" I asked, a pause, then, "Not where you expect." I hung up and sat there a long time. Because the mistake men make when they hunt someone like me is assuming the pressure point is business or money or reputation. It is. It's timing. I knew what they were going to do before they did it. That's what kept me alive all those years, seeing the shape of the move before the hand reaches the piece. They were going to make it public. Noise. Headlines. A spectacle meant to scare everyone who still respected me into forgetting my name. That kind of move only works once, and only if the man on the other end panics. The next morning, I put on my best suit, not for defense, for posture. When the cars finally came down the block, slow and official, I was already standing outside, waiting, because if you're going to be tested, you don't hide in the house, you step onto the street, look the world in the eye, and decide whether today is the day. Someone learns who really controls the ending. They came with paperwork instead of guns. That's how you know they're serious. 3 cars, clean paint, doors opening in sync like rehearsal. Men stepping out already convinced the ending was written. I stayed where I was, hands loose at my sides, face calm, let the block watch. Neighbors peeked from windows. Word travels faster than sirens in Harlem. Everybody knew something heavy was happening. Nobody said a word. The man in front read my name off a page like it gave him courage. I listened. He talked about charges, about associations, about patterns that looked ugly when you stacked them just right. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I nodded once. "Is that it?" I asked. That shook him a little. They moved to take me, professional, careful, cameras already out. This was meant to be a picture, a moment, a lesson. As they turned me toward the car, I leaned in just enough for the lead man to hear me. "You're late," I said again. He frowned. "What?" "You should have done this years ago," I continued. "Now you're walking into a version of the city that's already adjusted." He didn't understand yet. That was fine. As the door opened, I looked past them down the street where another car had just pulled to the curb, unmarked, wrong plates. Men inside who weren't part of the plan. Their eyes met mine. And in that instant, I knew something had gone off script. Because when too many players show up for the same ending, somebody miscalculated, the door closed, the engine started, and whatever story they thought they were finishing, it was about to split into something nobody could control. The second car didn't follow procedure. That's how I knew it wasn't theirs. Different posture, different patience. The kind of men who don't rush because they don't need permission. They stayed parked while the agents tightened their grip on a story they thought they owned. I watched through the glass as we pulled off. The agents were stiff now, radios buzzing low, somebody whispering questions that weren't getting answered. I leaned back in the seat. Let the cuffs sit where they were. Metal doesn't bother you once you've worn worse. Who are they? One of the agents asked the driver. No answer. That's when the unmarked car moved. Smooth, perfect distance, not tailing, shadowing. The agent beside me noticed, tried not to react, failed. Problem? I asked. He didn't look at me. Just sit tight. I smiled. They always say that right before things get loose. We hit a red light, long one, too long. The unmarked car slid closer. Window cracked an inch, just enough. A voice came through, calm, familiar in a way I didn't like. Change of plans, it said. We're taking him. The agents froze. Bad moment. 3 authorities, 1 street, no clear chain of command. That's when men make choices they regret forever. I leaned forward slightly. Gentlemen, I said, this is where you decide who you work for. Hands moved, radios squawked. Somebody shouted a name I hadn't heard in years, then everything stopped. Traffic, noise, time, because when power collides with power, the city holds its breath, and whichever side blinked first was going to lose more than a case. I stayed still, watching, waiting to see who was brave enough to make the next mistake. Nobody blinked. That was the problem. The light stayed red. Engines idled. The air inside the car thickened like it knew something was about to snap. The voice from the other car didn't repeat itself. Men with real authority never do. They wait. Let everyone else reveal who they are. One of the agents swallowed hard. I heard it. Sound travels different when fear's in the room. This isn't your jurisdiction, he said, trying to sound taller than he was. The window across from us rolled down another inch. It is now. That's when I felt it, not relief, not victory, risk. Because when powerful men argue in public, the weakest person in the equation is always the one in cuffs. I cleared my throat. Easy, I said. This don't need to turn into a headline. Every head turned toward me. Funny how that works. When chaos shows up, everybody starts listening to the man who looks the least worried. The driver tightened his grip on the wheel. The agent nearest the door shifted, hand close to something he didn't want to use. The unmarked car edged closer, too close. And that's when another sound cut through it all. Sirens. Multiple, coming fast, not planned, not coordinated. Real noise, somebody had called it in. Somebody outside this little circle wanted control back. I leaned into the seat, eyes forward, heartbeat steady. Because now it wasn't about who wanted me. It was about who could keep me. And in the next 60 seconds, someone was going to choose between pride and survival. While I sat there silent, already counting the ways this could end wrong, the sirens got closer, too many of them. Different pitches, different tempos. That meant nobody was coordinating anymore. That meant fear had jumped the tracks. The agent nearest me wiped sweat from his lip. Didn't even realize he did it. Outside, the men in the unmarked car stayed still, calm like they were waiting on a verdict they already knew. Traffic started backing up, drivers craning necks, somebody somewhere already dialing a reporter. This was turning into exactly the kind of mess nobody could control once it spilled. I leaned forward just enough to make my cuffs clink. That sound you hear, I said quietly, that's the city waking up. And once it's awake, it don't care who started what. The agent finally looked at me, really looked. He saw it then, not confidence, not bravado, acceptance. Men like him think power is about holding on. Men like me learn early it's about knowing when to let go. The sirens rounded the corner, blue, red, white, flooding the street. Orders started flying from every direction. Nobody agreeing, everybody shouting rank. The unmarked car door opened. One man stepped out. Didn't draw attention. He met my eyes through the glass and gave the smallest nod. Not a greeting, a warning. Because whatever decision got made next wasn't about law or justice or right and wrong. It was about which version of the truth would survive the night. The agents hesitated. The city closed in. And right there in the middle of the noise, the lights, the waiting eyes. I realized something cold and clear. No matter who walked away with me, somebody powerful was about to lose, and powerful men don't forgive that. The door handle twitched. Someone shouted my name, and the city leaned forward, ready to see which way I'd fall. They chose noise. That told me everything. A senior voice cut through the shouting. Badge flashed. Authority asserted. The kind that doesn't ask if it's welcome. Release the vehicle, now. The agents hesitated half a second too long. That half second cost them control. Hands unlocked my cuffs, fast, nervous, like they were afraid of touching me too long. I stepped out slow. Let the cameras catch it. Let the neighbors see me standing on my own feet. No resistance, no celebration. The man from the unmarked car was already gone, slipped back into traffic like he'd never been there. That worried me more than if he'd stayed. Because men who disappear before the ending are usually planning a different one. A supervisor leaned close, voice tight. This isn't over. I nodded. It never is. They cleared the street fast after that. Too fast. Like they wanted the moment buried before it grew legs. I walked home alone. That's important. No car, no entourage, just me and the block. Letting people see I wasn't being carried by anyone. Inside, the house was quiet, Mame asleep, Margaret's door closed, safe, still clean. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark and waited for my heartbeat to slow. That's when the phone rang. No introduction, no breathing, just a voice. You embarrassed the wrong people tonight. I smiled into the receiver. Get in line, I said. The line went dead. I stayed sitting there long after the dial tone faded, thinking about something I'd learned the hard way. There are enemies you defeat. There are enemies you survive. And then there are enemies who smile, step back, and start planning a future that doesn't include mercy. Outside, a car rolled past too slow. I didn't look up, because the next move wasn't going to come from the street. It was going to come from somewhere higher. And when it did, it wouldn't knock. Morning didn't bring relief. It brought envelopes, not threats, not warrants. Invitations, quiet ones, lunch requests, board meetings. Civic nonsense dressed up like respect. That's how the higher floors move. They don't shout, they schedule. I let them stack up unopened. Margaret left early for class, humming to herself, carrying a future that didn't know my name was being spoken in rooms she'd never enter. I watched her from the window until she turned the corner. Counted the steps, old habit. Then I made my own call, not to a politician, not to a fixer, to a man who hated owing me and hated the people above him even more. We met where the city forgets itself. No waiters, no records, just coffee that tasted like decisions. They're trying to freeze you out, he said, make you expensive to be near. I nodded. They always do. They'll offer peace, he continued, but it won't be yours. I smiled. Peace never is. He slid something across the table, not paper, not proof. A timeline, dates, votes, promotions, a reshuffling so quiet it looked accidental, names rising, names falling, a staircase being rebuilt while people were still walking on it. They think you're tired, he said. They think age makes men careful. I stood up and left money on the table I didn't owe. Careful, I said, is how you step around a mess. I'm here to decide who cleans it. Outside, the city moved like nothing was wrong. Buses, kids, vendors arguing over nickels. Above all of it, somewhere high and carpeted, men were choosing language, deciding tone, practicing smiles. They thought the story was winding down. They didn't see the problem. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was deciding what would be left standing when it was over. And when the first call came from upstairs that afternoon. Not asking, not threatening, just expecting. I let it ring, because the next answer I gave was going to Chain, who felt safe in this city. For a long time, I let the phone ring until it stopped. That matters. When men expect obedience, silence rattles them more than refusal. It forces imagination to do the work, and imagination always goes darker than reality. The second call came an hour later. Different number. Same confidence. I answered this one, no greeting, no name. You've become inconvenient, the voice said, smooth, educated, used to rooms where decisions don't echo. Inconvenience is temporary, I replied. Truth sticks around. A pause. I could hear papers shifting, other people listening. That told me I wasn't talking to the top, just a mouthpiece. We can make things easier, he said. For your family, for your legacy. That word, legacy. Men only bring it up when they're threatening to erase it. I stood and walked to the window, looked down at the street. Same kids playing, same vendors arguing, same Harlem that had survived worse than voices on a line. My family's already handled, I said. What you're really asking is whether I'll sit down. And he asked. And I don't sit unless I choose the chair. Silence again, longer this time. You're forcing our hand, he finally said. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. No, I corrected. I'm reminding you that you have one. The call ended clean. No drama. That's how real threats sound. Short, efficient, already moving. By nightfall, I felt it. The shift. Cars passing twice instead of once. Phones not ringing when they should. Men crossing the street to avoid being seen talking to me. That's when you know the pressure's gone vertical. Not street level, not legal, political. I sat alone at the table, lights off, listening to the house breathe. Upstairs, Margaret studied for an exam that would shape her life. She didn't know the ground under her name was being measured. I picked up the framed dollar check from the shelf and turned it over in my hands. Power always thinks it's permanent. It never is. Outside, a church bell rang late. Wrong hour, wrong rhythm. I set the frame back down carefully, because whatever was coming next wasn't about me anymore. It was about deciding whether this city would be run by men who hid behind systems, or by men who understood that every system still answers to somebody. And tomorrow morning, someone was going to make a move. That couldn't be taken back. The move came before sunrise. That's when cowards act. When the city's half awake and witnesses are still deciding whether to look out the window. A patrol car rolled slow past the house. Didn't stop. Didn't flash. Just enough presence to say we're still here. Then the phone rang. This one wasn't polished. No rehearsed calm. No committee breathing on the other end. This is friendly advice, the voice said. Get your affairs in order. I didn't ask who it was. Men who give warnings like that don't want conversation. They want to feel important one last time. I already did, I said. Click. I sat there in the dark, coat on, shoes laced, hat resting on the table. I'd been dressed an hour already. You don't wait for storms when you can smell them forming. At breakfast, Margaret talked about a test, about a professor who didn't like her questions, about how she planned to prove him wrong. I listened, smiled. Ask the right questions. That's the cruel balance. Holding two worlds steady at the same time. When she left, I walked her to the door. Watched her disappear down the block like she always did. I didn't know if it would be the last normal morning she ever had. That's the price. Back inside, Tiny was waiting, face tight, eyes tired. They're pushing for a sealed indictment, he said. No headlines yet, just enough rope to pull when they want. I nodded, which means they're scared. They think you'll fold. I stood and put on my hat. Then let's disappoint them. We didn't go underground, didn't hide money, didn't burn records. I did the opposite. I made myself visible, walked into rooms I wasn't invited to, shook hands that didn't want shaking, sat where silence followed, let them feel it, because power hates uncertainty more than opposition. By evening, the whispers were loud enough to hear without leaning in. Deals being reconsidered, promotions paused, orders delayed. Somewhere up high, someone was realizing this wasn't going the way it was supposed to. I went home late. As I turned the key, that instinct hit me again. Sharp, immediate. Something inside the house wasn't right. I didn't rush, didn't call out. I stepped in slow, and that's when I saw it. The framed dollar check. The reminder. The leash. Gone, just an empty hook on the wall, swinging slightly. That wasn't theft. That was a message. And whoever sent it didn't understand one thing. When you take a man's reminder, you become it, and now. I knew exactly where to look next. They didn't take the frame for money. They took it for nerve. Only someone who understood its meaning would touch it. Only someone close enough to feel bold would dare remove it from my wall. That narrowed things down real fast. I stood there a long moment, staring at the empty hook, letting the silence talk. No broken glass, no forced door. Whoever came in didn't rush. They walked like they belonged. That meant two things. They had access, and they wanted me to know it. I sat down at the table and waited. That's what you do when the threat wants reaction. You deny it the pleasure. Tiny showed up an hour later, breath tight, eyes scanning corners. Words moving, he said. Something off. People are asking questions they shouldn't know to ask. Good, I said. Means someone's talking too loud. About Margaret, he added. Quiet. That changed the air, not a threat yet, not directly, just curiosity. Schedules, campuses, names of professors, the kind of information that pretends to be harmless until it is. I stood up. No, I said, that's the line. Tiny nodded. He already knew. I made 3 calls, short ones, old names, older debts, not asking for favors, collecting acknowledgments. By midnight, I knew who took the frame. Not a cop, not a politician, an intermediary, a man who thought carrying messages made him untouchable. Thought proximity to power was the same thing as owning it. He wanted a meeting. He got one tomorrow night. Neutral ground, quiet place. The kind where voices don't carry and mistakes don't echo. I put the frame's empty hook back on the wall, straightened it carefully, because whoever thought they were escalating had just misunderstood the rhythm. You don't threaten a man through his family unless you're ready to finish what you start. And tomorrow, someone was going to learn. That reminders work both ways. Neutral ground is never neutral. It just means nobody plans to call the police. The place was a closed-down social club off Lenox. No sign, no music, chairs stacked like forgotten memories. I arrived early, always do. The first man in the room controls the air. I sat where the light didn't reach clean. Let shadows do some of the work. He came alone, which told me he still believed in negotiation. Mid-40s, cheap confidence, expensive jacket. Hands that shook just enough to admit the truth. He didn't sit right away. You know why I took it, he said. I know why you thought you could, I replied. He smiled nervously. Tried to frame it as business, as communication, as pressure meant to avoid worse outcomes. That's the language of men who never bled for their choices. You think you're untouchable, he said, but things are shifting. New people upstairs, they don't respect old balances. I leaned forward, let him feel the room shrink. Old balances, I said, are the only reason you're still breathing. That smile vanished. He reached into his coat slowly, not for a gun, for the frame. He set it on the table between us. The dollar check still inside, untorn, untouched. A warning, he said. That's all it was meant to be. I looked at it for a long moment, then I slid it back toward him. No, I said, that was your warning. His eyes widened. What does that mean? Before I could answer, a sound cut through the building. Footsteps. Multiple, too heavy, too confident. He heard them too. Color drained from his face. You said neutral. I said quiet, I replied. The door at the far end creaked open. Light spilled in, and whoever stepped through it next wasn't here to negotiate. The footsteps didn't hurry. That's how you know they came prepared to stay. 4 men came through the door, not dressed alike, not trying to look official. Different styles, same confidence. The kind that comes from knowing someone else will clean up after you. The intermediary turned halfway toward them, relief flickering across his face like he thought backup had arrived. That was his second mistake. One of the men glanced at him, then back at me. No introduction. No rush. So this is how you handle warnings now, he said, face to face. I didn't stand. Standing can look defensive. You sent a message through the wrong hands, I said. That's sloppy. He smiled thin. We wanted to see how you'd react. You broke into my house. That got your attention. I leaned back slightly. You already had it. The intermediary looked between us, confusion hardening into fear. He finally understood he wasn't part of the conversation anymore. Am I good? He asked. Nobody answered him. That's when he started sweating. The man closest to him put a hand on his shoulder, gentle, reassuring. Step outside, he said. We'll talk later. The intermediary looked at me. Hopeful, desperate. I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I just watched. They guided him toward the back door. He kept glancing over his shoulder until the door closed behind him. The room got quieter. The leader stepped closer, hands open, like this was still business. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "We don't want blood, we want compliance." I smiled then, small, controlled. "You already took blood," I said. "You just haven't seen it yet." His expression tightened. "Your granddaughter," he began. I cut him off with one finger raised, not angry, certain. "That name," I said softly, "doesn't get spoken in rooms like this." Silence snapped into place. Outside, somewhere behind the building, a car door slammed, then another, then nothing. The man in front of me swallowed. "You're boxed in," he said, trying to recover. "Politics. Courts, feds, you can't fight all of it." "I'm not fighting," I replied. "I'm choosing." He tilted his head. "Choosing what?" Before I could answer, a sound rolled through the walls. Not a gunshot, not a scream, just a sudden heavy quiet. The kind that only shows up after something irreversible happens. I stood up for the first time that night, and every man in that room felt it, because whatever just happened outside wasn't part of their plan. And it meant the balance had shifted again. Nobody asked what that sound was. Men who survive long enough learn when answers are dangerous. The leader's eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. He was doing the math fast, subtracting assumptions he'd walked in with. "You didn't set this up," he said. "No," I replied. "You did." That landed. He took a step back, just one, enough to admit uncertainty. "This was supposed to be leverage," he said, "pressure, a reminder of how things work now." I moved past him toward the door. Slow, deliberate, every step counted. "Reminders are tricky," I said. "They tend to remind both ways." I opened the back door. Cold night air rushed in. The alley was empty, too empty. No intermediary, no guards, just a single hat on the ground, crushed where someone had stepped on it without stopping. I bent down, picked it up, brushed the dust off like it mattered. Behind me, the men hadn't followed. They were listening, waiting for permission they weren't going to get. I turned back. "Here's how this ends," I said. "You go back upstairs. You tell whoever sent you that this city still remembers old balances, and you tell them something else." They watched me now, all of them. "You don't touch my family, not with words, not with shadows, not with reminders." The leader tried one last angle. Pride usually makes that mistake. "And if we don't?" I met his eyes. "Then you'll keep losing pieces," I said, quietly, "until you realize the board never belonged to you." No threats, no drama, just truth delivered flat. They left in silence, didn't look back. I stayed a moment longer, alone with the alley and the night and the weight of what had just been decided. Somewhere, someone was going to have to explain why a simple message turned into a disappearance, why a warning turned into a lesson. That wasn't my problem. I walked home slow. The house was dark, safe, still standing. I hung the framed dollar back on the wall myself, straightened it until it sat perfect, because power isn't loud. It doesn't announce victories, it just makes sure certain lines never get crossed again, and if they do, the city remembers. Who taught it where they were, the city didn't celebrate, it adjusted. That's how you know something real happened. No headlines, no speeches, just small changes in behavior. Phones answered quicker. Meetings postponed without explanation. Men choosing different seats in rooms they thought they owned. The intermediary's name stopped circulating. Not erased, just avoided. Like saying it out loud might invite questions nobody wanted to answer. Margaret never noticed. She came home talking about finals, about summer plans, about how the future suddenly felt wide instead of sharp. I listened, asked the right questions, kept my voice even. Protection means never letting the protected feel the weight. But at night, when the house settled, I stayed awake. Because power doesn't disappear when it loses, it studies, it learns, it waits for the version of you that gets tired. Tiny came by one last time that week. "They're backing off," he said, "for now." "For now," I repeated. He hesitated. "There's talk, not about you directly, about legacy, about what happens after." That's when I felt it again. Not danger, not relief, transition. Men weren't just reacting anymore. They were planning past me. That's the real endgame. You don't beat a king by charging the throne. You wait for time to do the work. I walked him out and stood on the stoop alone. Harlem breathing around me. Same streets, different temperature. Somewhere downtown, files were being reorganized. Somewhere uptown, names were being floated for roles that didn't exist yet. Somewhere above all of it, men were asking the wrong question. Not how do we stop him, but what happens when he's gone? I looked up at the windows of my building. At the light in Margaret's room, at the life still moving forward. They thought the story was closing. They didn't understand something simple. The most dangerous part of the game isn't the war, it's the moment after. When everyone thinks it's safe to start playing again. And somewhere out there tonight, someone was already making a move. That would decide how this city remembers my name. I turned back inside, because if they were planning the future, I needed to see it. Before it arrived, time slowed after that, not in a peaceful way, in a way that makes every sound sharper, every knock questionable, every smile feel rehearsed. That's when I knew the real test wasn't coming from enemies, it was coming from allies. Men I'd broken bread with started checking the room before they spoke. Old friends suddenly busy, meetings rescheduled twice, then forgot. Respect was still there, but loyalty was being audited. That's the stage nobody warns you about. When people stop asking, "Are you strong?" and start asking, "How long will you be?" I got word through a channel that still worked. Not a threat, not a warning, a question. If the city changes hands, where do you stand? That question is poison. It pretends to be neutral, but it's really asking who you're willing to sacrifice to stay relevant. I didn't answer. Instead, I did something quieter. I started listening. Listened to who was moving too fast, who was talking about next chapters, who stopped using my name and started using past tense. That told me enough. One night late, Margaret came downstairs in her robe, couldn't sleep, mind racing about the future. She sat across from me at the table, unaware of how heavy the room really was. "Granddaddy," she said, "do people ever get tired of being afraid?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," I said. "That's when they make mistakes." She nodded like that made sense. Went back upstairs, light off, door closed. I stayed sitting there because fear wasn't the problem anymore. Confidence was. Somewhere in this city, someone believed the crown was loose, believed the old lion was slowing down, believed respect could be inherited without earning it. That belief doesn't stay harmless for long. I reached for the phone again but didn't dial. Not yet. Because the next call wouldn't be about defense. It would be about succession. And whoever answered it was going to decide whether Harlem stayed balanced or learned the hard way what happens when men rush to fill a shadow. That's still very much alive. Succession is a dirty word. It sounds orderly, planned. Like power politely steps aside and hands over the keys. That's not how it's ever worked in this city. Power doesn't retire. It tests whoever reaches for it. I made the call just after midnight. Not to the loudest man, not to the smartest, not to the one everybody expected. I called the one who hadn't been moving at all. He answered on the second ring. "No greeting. You watching?" I asked. "Always," he said. "Good answer." We didn't talk long. Long talks create witnesses. We spoke in half sentences, assumptions, things understood without being said. When I hung up, I felt something settle. Not peace, alignment. The next morning, rumors started walking before I did. Meetings canceled for no reason. A deal that was supposed to close suddenly stalled. A man who'd been talking big all month stopped showing his face. That's how you know a new gravity entered the room. People weren't sure if it was me or something moving through me. That uncertainty did the work. By evening, someone made a mistake, a small one, a whisper in the wrong ear, a move too early, too public, too hungry. Word reached me fast, a name, a location, an intention. I didn't react right away. I poured a drink, sat at the table, let the weight of it press down until it showed its shape. Upstairs, Margaret laughed at something on the radio. Life still happening, still worth protecting. I stood and put on my coat, not for confrontation, for confirmation. Because when a man reaches too early for what isn't his, the city has a way of answering. And tonight, someone was about to learn whether they were stepping into a future or into a hole that had been waiting for them all along. The location told me everything, too public to be smart, too loud to be patient. That's how you spot ambition pretending it's destiny. I didn't bring muscle, didn't need a show. I went alone, coat button, pace even, like a man headed somewhere he'd already been invited. The place was buzzing when I arrived. Too many laughs, too many eyes checking doors. Confidence on credit always spends fast. I took a seat near the back, watched. The man I came for was holding court, talking about the future like it was already his, dropping my name like it belonged to yesterday. That's another mistake people make. They think saying it out loud makes it true. I waited until he noticed me. You can always tell the moment someone's stomach drops, shoulders stiffen, smile loses its shape. Words come out half a second late. He excused himself from the circle and walked over, trying to look casual, trying to look grown. "You should have called," he said. "I did," I replied. "A long time ago." "You didn't answer." He swallowed. We stood there a moment, noise pressing in around us. Nobody else close enough to hear, everybody close enough to feel it. "I'm just preparing," he said. "In case." "In case of what?" "In case the city needs continuity." I nodded slowly. "Continuity don't come from reaching," I said. "It comes from surviving." He laughed, a short, sharp sound meant to hide the fear. "You can't hold it forever." "I'm not trying to," I said. "I'm deciding who doesn't." His eyes flicked to the exits, calculating, always a bad sign. I leaned in just enough. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to stop talking about tomorrow. You're going to sit down and you're going to wait." "And if I don't?" he asked. I straightened my coat. "Then you'll learn why some men never get remembered," I said, even when they were sure it was their turn. I walked out without waiting for an answer. Behind me, the room didn't follow right away. That told me he hadn't decided yet. That was dangerous. Because when a man hears the truth and still believes the lie, the city usually gets involved, and by morning, someone was going to force the issue. Morning forced the issue. It always does. I heard about it before I finished my coffee. Too many voices trying to sound casual. Too many pauses where certainty used to live. The man from the night before didn't sit down. He doubled down. Called a meeting he had no right to call. Promised protection he couldn't guarantee. Used my absence like proof of weakness. That's the danger zone. When confidence turns reckless and pulls other people into its gravity. I didn't interrupt it. Interrupting makes martyrs. I let it breathe. By noon, the consequences started arriving on their own. A promised shipment didn't show. A phone that always rang stayed quiet. Two men who were supposed to stand beside him suddenly remembered appointments elsewhere. Panic crept in. You can hear it in how fast words come out. He tried to reach me. Left messages that sounded respectful on the surface and desperate underneath. I didn't answer. Not yet, because the city was already responding. Slowly, naturally, like a body rejecting something foreign. That afternoon, I walked past the barber shop and felt the shift. Conversation stopped when I entered, then restarted softer. Not fear, alignment. That's when I knew it was over for him. Not because I said so, because nobody was willing to stand where he was standing anymore. Still, men like that don't go quietly. Pride won't allow it. They reach for one last move, something dramatic enough to force relevance back into the picture. That's what I was waiting for. As night settled in, a call finally came through. Not from him, from someone trying to clean up his mess. "He's talking crazy," the voice said, saying tonight's the night. I closed my eyes for a moment. Tonight is a dangerous word. I stood up and grabbed my coat. Not to stop him, not to save him. To see where the line would finally be drawn. Because when a man decides to make his last move, the city doesn't ask permission. It just decides. Who's still standing? When the lights come back on, the last move came just after midnight, loud enough to be noticed, sloppy enough to be fatal. He didn't come for me. That was the mistake. Men like him always think the throne matters more than the bloodline. He came for territory. Tried to take a corner that wasn't empty, a business that still answered my name even when I wasn't in the room. He showed up with too many people and not enough permission. That's how the city knew it was over, because Harlem doesn't punish ambition, it punishes disrespect. I didn't go there, I didn't have to. By the time word reached me, it was already finished. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just final, a misunderstanding, a sudden absence, a name that would be spoken once more and then not at all. That's how the city cleans itself. I sat at my table when the phone rang. "It's done," the voice said. No pride, no relief, just confirmation. I thanked him and hung up. Upstairs, Margaret was asleep, dreaming about a future that didn't know how close it came to being interrupted. That was the point of everything. By morning, the story had already been rewritten, not erased, adjusted. People spoke carefully, blamed chaos, blamed greed, blamed nobody important. No one said my name. That's when you know you've won. I walked the block later that day. Same stoop, same faces, different posture. Men nodded, women smiled, kids played like nothing bad ever happens here. Power restored doesn't announce itself. It settles back into place like it was never disturbed. At home, I took the framed dollar down one last time. Not because I needed the reminder anymore, because reminders are for men who might forget. I wrapped it carefully and put it away. Some lessons don't need to stay on the wall once they've been learned. That night I helped Margaret study, quizzed her, corrected her gently, watched her grow into a world that would never know what was done to keep it open for her. Before bed, she hugged me. "Good night, Granddaddy," she said. "Good night, baby." When the house went quiet, I sat alone and listened to the city breathe. Harlem was balanced again. Not peaceful, not perfect, balanced. And if someday someone else decides the crown is loose, decides the shadow looks empty, the city will remember, because power doesn't disappear, it just waits. And I was still here.